Hey, welcome back to the channel. I'm Jocelyn,
I'm Jaden.
and this is our Beyond the Film Room breakdown of film and television through the lens of the four cores of peak performance. Superman just dropped, and it's a great film, all in all.
You have a dog?
We're going to do our four core breakdown as we typically do, but we're going to go in reverse order. So typically we go from physical, mental, social, and then spiritual. Today we're going to start with the spiritual core just because of the nature of this movie. And when you go and see it, you'll understand why. So if you haven't seen it yet, literally just dropped just before the weekend at the time of this filming. So if you haven't seen it, go and watch it first, then come back and check out this breakdown. But first question for you, Jaden. Looking at the spiritual core of this movie, which I think encompasses a lot of what makes this movie work, especially for this character, and why this director is such a good fit for this film. So tell me, I guess specifically, let's look at it from an identity standpoint, which I think was a key theme in this video. In this movie. What did you think about the idea of Superman and identity throughout this film?
Yeah. So I think that James Gunn's take on Superman now in comparison to Zack Snyder and who Henry Cavill was as a Superman, this Superman we see is a lot more, I guess, naive and deals with being like he's an alien on Earth, but he's just beloved by everybody. And he knows who he is as a person and who he was sent to be, or what he thinks he was sent to be on Earth, which you kind of find out as a little bit of a twist later on in the movie in terms of what his mission was supposed to be from his parents versus what his mission he thought was from his parents and who he grew up to be. But Superman in this movie, from an identity standpoint, is just a beacon of hope to people. And he knows that he's that beacon of hope. He sees himself as that beacon of hope. And he sees himself as kind of like savior-esque, but also knows that he wants to be like everybody else. He wants to be human like everybody else, but just be a good person at the end of the day. And yeah, I mean, later on in the movie, he finds out that his parents sent him there to become a ruler or to kind of take over Earth. And they do mention like getting rid of everyone that doesn't obey you or everyone that doesn't serve you. And he kind of has a little bit of an identity crisis, like, oh, I'm not the person who I really thought I was. My parents wanted me to be someone different. People are going to see me differently. But he kind of comes to realize later on in the movie when he goes to see his parents, like his non-biological parents at the farm, that his identity doesn't have to be defined by his parents or people on Earth or his friends or whoever, and that the man that he is the person he chose to be and who he grew up to be, and he can still make that choice despite his parents having a different goal or different mission for himself. Throughout the whole movie, Superman is this just beacon of hope.
Totally. And
when you look at Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, I think that Superman kind of goes through more waves, like up and down waves of, oh, who am I? What am I supposed to do? It's more of a becoming of Superman movie, whereas this one, he's been Superman.
Right.
So yeah, I think from an identity standpoint, this one's a lot more lighthearted, a lot more like hopeful. And although he goes through moments of, well, who am I really supposed to be, or who was I meant to be, he still comes to terms with like, no, I'm Superman. This is who I am. And he has this whole spiel at the end of the movie with Lex about, what makes me just as human as everyone else is I still make mistakes. I still have to make decisions. I still have to go through different emotions. But that's like the beauty behind it, is that I make the choice to be a good person every single day.
Yeah, I think that was a key thing that James Gunn was able to capture in this movie. And we're going to be comparing to Man of Steel, I think, constantly throughout, because it's the most logical comparison. It's the most recent Superman. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Henry Cavill, although I think Corn Sweat did an amazing job, and he really he feels like the right fit for this Superman, James Gunn's take on it. But again, from an identity standpoint, I think the same thing. And I think one of the things that makes Superman an intriguing character and a difficult one to make a movie about is that he's got kind of this, think about Captain America, right? It's kind of this very pure, clean purpose. And it sometimes doesn't make for interesting movie watching.
I would agree, yeah.
Right? You think about a character like Batman or even Spider-Man, right? Like people who are probably good people at heart, but are conflicted and have personal trauma and turmoils that they've gone through. Now, granted, Superman was sent to Earth and his parents, died on his home planet. But I think what James Gunn did a really good job of was solidifying kind of his purpose early on. And the reason that he does what he does is because he feels like he was called to do that, like it's his mission, right? On Earth. So he feels like he's in a position to be a protector. He embraces that role, and sometimes naively, which we'll unpack a little bit later on in terms of the core plot of the movie, I guess, and some other. We'll look at it from maybe more of a critical review standpoint. We'll talk a little bit about that, but he embraces his purpose as this savior, but also doesn't want to be seen as a savior necessarily, right? And it is with that visit with his dad a little bit later on in the movie, and the dad said, it's your actions that define you. Nobody else can create that identity for you. They did a really great job of kind of bringing the heart of that traditional comic book Superman to this movie, and I think that's really why it succeeds, and why a lot of the reviews that we've seen have been celebrating this as this is like a return to form for comic book movies. And I think it sits in a class by itself because of the type of character that Superman is, and because his purpose and identity is so central to defining what makes him tick and why he does what he does. What are some of the beliefs that Superman and the people in his immediate circle, I'm thinking Lois Lane specifically, what are some of the, maybe conflicting beliefs that they have early on in the movie, and how do those get resolved?
Well, Superman deals with a lot of backlash early on, and they have this interview scene where Lois and Clark Kent they're at home together, and they're kind of celebrating their 3-month anniversary, and Clark lets Lois interview Superman. You learn that Superman is dealing with backlash from the public about, well, he can just fly to different countries without having to talk to the president or Secretary of Defense or whoever. And he went to go save, I don't remember what the country that he saved was, from Bavaria or something like that. That was the country attacking. I don't remember the country that was being attacked. But yeah, essentially he's dealing with backlash because he went and stopped this war, but people are saying, well, how do you know what you were stopping, and you didn't even talk to, both sides of the war. But Superman believes that what he's doing is right, even if he doesn't have to talk to other people about it, because he just trusts his heart, and he trusts who he is as a person, and he just doesn't want people to die. Whereas Lois is coming from a standpoint as, hey, as a citizen of Earth, and a citizen of a country, and having to honor the rules that are put in place by, the US or the world or whatever. What gives Superman the right to, go out of his way or to cross borders and make the decisions or take matters into his own hands versus governments doing that job? Yeah. Obviously as a fan watching it, you're rooting for Superman. You're no, he's right. But you can understand where they're both coming from. It's kind of like a Captain America Civil War situation. That's what I got out of it. It's that's Iron Man had the stance of, we need to be put in check, whereas Captain America's well, the only people that we should be trusting to put matters into our own hands are our own. And that's valid in Superman's case. Yeah. And yeah, he is stopping a war, but these are kind of the two different sides that they deal with. So the world is kind of divided, I guess, in terms of government people and Lex against Superman, and then the people of Earth who love Superman.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I agreed, and that's a great comparison in terms of Civil War, and I think in terms of just how this movie sets itself up, if we're doing that kind of comparison, this is a much simpler story, I guess, if you want to put it that way, right? Put it. And they don't dive into that aspect of what is this role that this person should have, and Superman believes one thing and Lois believes another, and I think they eventually are able to come to terms with it. But you use that example of of Civil War and kind of how they explore these themes of responsibility and accountability and power and how to use that power. One of the, for me, again, because James Gunn set the rules for this movie pretty quickly, and you get the sense that you kind of just have to suspend disbelief a little bit, right? It's like, okay, like we get that this is a new Superman, and this is that that kind of typical comic book Superman where, we're not going to deal a whole lot in reality here. We're going to just kind of suspend disbelief and just engage in the world that James Gunn has created. He does a great job in terms of making this feeling of, like you said, that beacon of hope. And so you kind of are able to disregard a lot of the government political pieces. Like even the president of Bavaria feels very, I don't know what the right
he's
word
just
is.
kind of like goofy a little bit. Like you can't really take him seriously.
You can't take him seriously.
So you mentioned how in this one, it's like a lot more lighthearted and like easier to explain in comparison to Civil War. But the difference is that, like, first of all, in Civil War, we have now seen cases where Sokovia was destroyed, and that situation with Wanda at the beginning of the movie, and New York, like all of these things had already happened coming up to Civil War. So you understand, like, you can kind of see from both sides. Like Captain America is right, but so is Iron Man, and Iron Man has a conversation with the lady at the beginning of the movie where her son died. And so, like, yeah, it's heavier because you've now seen all of this unfold. And we obviously know that the Avengers are good people.
Yeah.
But the damage they have left behind is not something that can be ignored. And so I think that movie tackles it a lot better. Whereas with Superman, like you mentioned, it's a little bit more, like, it's not as realistic.
No, it's very black and white.
Yeah.
It's very black and white, which again is okay. And we're going to kind of come back to this because I think what makes this movie great is that James Gunn, again, sets his own rules. It's lighthearted. It's humorous. There's a lot of, my wife, his mom was like, there was a lot of like violence. I'm like, it wasn't violent. It was very comic book violent.
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of action, right? But you pointed out, I don't think there's maybe one person who actually dies in this entire movie.
I realized yesterday, I felt like the stakes weren't super high, which isn't an issue. It's just, I think one person died that had some sort of emotional feeling. And now that we're talking about Civil War, like, I understand that they don't want Superman to be going out of his way and doing whatever. He didn't kill anyone when he was stopping that war.
Right.
All he did was threaten the president, and he's a bad person.
Yeah.
So I think Civil War is a good comparison in terms of how they viewed it, but even still, like, the stakes are nowhere near the same.
For sure. Man of Steel kind of set the stakes in that you have this incredibly powerful person with really no accountability, and his purpose wasn't really clear. And there were stakes. There were people that died. There were, property getting destroyed. And they talk about that in this one, but they kind of gloss over it. Whereas, in Man of Steel, it's a very real concern. And they're like, we need to get this person in check. And, eventually in the Batman movies or when he joins the Justice League, like, that's his issue, right? It's like, you are this incredibly powerful being with no accountability. Who can hold you in check?
Yeah.
We need to take care of this. So they touch on that in this movie, but not a whole lot. It's very lighthearted, and I think it works. So as we transition kind of from spiritual to the social aspect of the movie, and there's a lot of fun relationships that are built, and there's a lot of, I won't even call them cameos, like they are characters in the movie. Like they're not in it for very much.
They had roles,
but
though.
they had significant
had
roles. Talk to me about what you thought about the interaction between Superman and Lois and Jimmy Olsen and the rest of the Justice Gang, and kind of how that worked.
Yeah, I want to start with the Justice Gang, because what I do want to say is when I first saw the trailer, I was kind of upset, only because I wanted a standalone Superman movie, and I was like, is James Gunn about to bring in this whole team and just make it like a team type movie? They were not in it nearly as much as I thought they were going to be, which I'm kind of happy about. I think that their screen time and roles were almost perfect for the movie, to be honest. And they were good characters. Guy Gardner, I'll start with Guy Gardner. When I saw there was going to be a Green Lantern in the movie, I wasn't super thrilled that it was him. but clearly his role is not going to be something huge. And he was funny. Like I thought he was,
relief.
yeah, I thought he was a good comic relief character. I thought that he played the part really well. I thought he was good. Hawkgirl didn't get that much screen time. I thought she was cool. Hopefully they use her in a Justice League movie in the future, whatever James Gunn's plans are for that. But I liked Hawkgirl. Mr. Terrific was the most surprising, though.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Mr. Terrific. I knew about the other characters to a certain extent. Hawkgirl most out of the 3 Justice Gang members. But I liked him. And he got a bigger role than I was thinking he was going to get.
Yeah.
Jimmy and Lois were great.
Yeah.
I love this Lois Lane.
Yeah.
I think she feels... The Amy Adams Lois Lane in Man of Steel was a little more like light and soft,
right.
and I guess more like damsel in distressy.
Right.
Whereas I think this one was like very much her own character, and she deals with her own stuff outside of Superman.
Right.
And like, you know, wanting to be in a relationship, but also not wanting to be in a relationship, and her career and all this stuff. So I just like her as a character. I think she's a good partner to Superman. And it's kind of interesting because Superman's more of this, like, oh, I love everybody. I'll do the best that I can. Whereas Lois is a little bit more hard-hearted, I think, than Superman, more like level-headed and stuff like that. So it's like a cool contrast between the two characters.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy was just awesome. I think Jimmy was just like a fun character to have. Yeah.
Mr. Terrific was like a pleasant surprise. Didn't know anything about this character. He did add some comic relief in terms of just the contrast of him from the other characters. He's very, very serious, very by the book, and at one point he's like, "I don't do emotions" or whatever he said to Lois, right? So he was a really cool character. Would love to see more of him. I agree. Lois Lane was a very strong character in this. I mean, in some ways, you could argue that she was, and we'll talk about the physical aspect a little bit later on, but she was probably one of the strongest characters in the movie in terms of taking charge and doing things, right? Like, she flies Mr. Terrific's ship, and she goes to find the Justice Gang, and like, she is very much a strong woman in this film. The other characters that I thought, like, and there were a lot as I think about it, because Superman's parents are in it. There's Lex and his gang.
Right.
There's Superman's biological parents. There's a lot of different characters.
There actually are a lot of characters
in this movie, but James Gunn does a good job of giving them kind of compartmentalized roles, and so it doesn't feel like, there are times where it feels like there's a lot of stuff happening in the film, and it's not really hard to keep track. But you talked about the stakes. It's like, well, what should I be invested in here? But at the same time, again, it's lighthearted, and you get the sense that he's building a social network around Superman, which I think, in contrast to, say, Man of Steel, for example, he felt very much like this kind of lone character, and he didn't have a ton of close relationships. You see the relationship with his family develop and with Lois, but he doesn't really have any other interactions. Whereas in this one, you definitely felt like, not only with the Justice Gang and Clark being Clark Kent at work and his co-workers at work, but you also see the relationship develop with the normal citizens of Earth, right? Like, you see some kind of interesting interactions. They go from loving him to hating him to loving him again, and he does a great job of just interacting with normal people. And the actor, he really captured this kind of down home Kansas kid, very naive character that is just relatable to everybody. Like, he doesn't swear throughout the movie. Like, there's a little end credit scene where he's like, oh, I can be kind of a bit of a jerk, and everyone laughs because it's like, really, but I think he does a great job, and the writing for his character did a really great job of making him this very approachable hero. And again, in contrast to, say, Man of Steel, where he felt aloof, maybe a little bit more removed. This Superman is very warm and approachable, and you feel like if you saw him on the street, he'd give you an autograph and a hug. And the other character, which is in the movie a whole lot more than I thought he would be, is Crypto, the dog.
I was going to ask you about Crypto and what you thought, because he was in it a lot.
He plays way more than I had anticipated. And I mean, he is for all intents and purposes, like an essential character to
Yeah.
this movie. But he also, what Gunn did with using him throughout the movie, I think was really interesting, because he was some comic relief for Superman, but it also showed Superman's a side of him that he couldn't control this dog, right? Like you see kind of throughout the movie that it's the one thing that Superman has like zero capacity to control over, and the dog is just needs some obedience training, just does everything wrong. But it was a really interesting contrast, and so I think his use of Krypto throughout the movie was actually, it was very well done.
I also think that Krypto was a good way to have Superman have a piece of home with him. And there's a point where when everything's kind of falling apart and this message gets leaked by Lex Luthor that Superman's mission is completely different than what people thought. All he's thinking about is, I just want my dog. Like, I just need Krypto. I need my dog. And so I think it's cool that Gunn had a way to have Superman have someone that he could connect to a little bit more than just like the humans around him, because obviously they're still not the same. Krypto is where Superman is, or from where Superman is from. So, and like you said, it was the only thing that Superman couldn't really control, which was interesting. And he makes jokes about like, he's a foster and whatever. So, but I liked Krypto, and I wasn't sure at first when I saw the trailer. I wanted to ask you about Metamorpho too, because one of my favorite shows growing up was the animated Justice League show. I was addicted to it. Me and my brother watched it all the time. And Metamorpho's in a few episodes, and I think he's a cool character. So I was kind of excited to see him in this. And I think he was the only character that felt like wasn't really needed.
Right.
Like the kryptonite part, obviously, but there's probably another way they could have done it. I just don't know. And then he's also on Earth with like a wife and a kid. It was kind of random. It wasn't bad. It was just random. I found.
It did feel random, and you're right. I think they used him for an appropriate purpose in terms of the kryptonite, and he also somehow is. I don't really understand his powers. Right, like he became like a rocket ship at one point.
Yeah, he's like an elemental person, but he can like shape shit, and then he like loses his body completely at some parts. It's just
It did feel random is probably the best word. I think his addition, it was kind of one of those characters that let's plug him in to fill this purpose, right? It didn't feel super well thought out, but I didn't have a huge issue with it. Plus, he's got his baby in the movie, which gives Superman some incentive at that specific scene to do some different things. But I thought it was interesting. I'd be curious to see if he's going to be in other movies and what they do with him, but. I think that's actually a good segue. We won't we'll say the mental core for the last. Let's jump to the physical piece, because talking about Metamorpho, he, for me, really highlighted what makes this Superman movie work, because one of the challenges with Superman as a character is that he is like invincible, right? Essentially, you can't stop him, you can't defeat him. Throughout, I would say, at least 50% of this movie, Superman is like down and out.
Yeah.
Like he is battered and bruised. Like the very first scene which was the clip that they released like really early on in the marketing for the film. Him bloody, laying, in the ice outside his Fortress of Solitude kind of thing, and Krypto has to come and save him. That's pretty much half the movie. Like Superman is getting beat up, and you realize later on why this is happening, because you're like, who could possibly be able to?
I guess they kind of revealed.
So they reveal it later. It turns out to be his clone, who's the only one, I guess, who could match his power. But I thought it was really intriguing that Gunn took that approach with Superman throughout this movie, and that it's really only at the end where you kind of see his full power, but kind of throughout, he is getting his butt handed to him kind of consistently.
It's kind of funny, because as soon as that first scene hit where he's laying on the snow and like he's bleeding out of his mouth and he has all these cuts on him, my very first thought went to BVS when Batman says, "Tell me, do you bleed?" I was like, okay, I guess he does. So I thought that was interesting. Like that was my very first thought when I saw that.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, so like physically, Superman is still Superman, but you don't see that side of him for the vast majority of the movie. There is a lot of So there's a lot of kind of physical mayhem that happens throughout the movie. And that was another thing that, again, you got to kind of suspend disbelief. Like there's this interdimensional rift that happens and literally destroys like half of Metropolis, and you're thinking, weren't there people in those buildings like that were getting toppled over
Right.
and destroyed, kind of thing, right? But I think from like the VFX in this movie are really good, and the action scenes in this movie are really good, but you don't really get the sense that Superman is this all-powerful, overpowering.
No, you don't.
being.
I almost wonder if James Gunn's approach for that was to make him more human-like and to have that last scene with him and Lex and his whole monologue mean a little bit more, like feel a little bit heavier. So I'm sure that his approach was more to be, he's more human-like than people realize. And I think, again, to draw the comparison to Man of Steel, like when you saw that Superman, he was way more godlike
Right.
than human.
Right.
You look up at the sky and see, like, there's scenes where they look up at the sky and they're seeing Henry Cavill's Superman flying, and it's just like he's something so surreal and out of this world. Whereas this one, he interacts with people on the street. When he's in the middle of a fight, people come up to talk to him, and
He's saving squirrels.
he's saving squirrels and saving pets, and he's a lot more I don't want to say likable, but I guess you mentioned it before. Like, he's just more approachable. He's more down to earth, and I want to say he's more for the people.
Right.
And so I think in order to show that more, it's like, not just in his relationship with people is he more down to earth, but he can get hurt sometimes, or he can get hit sometimes. And I mean, I guess that's for Superman fans to decide. Did James Gunn do a little bit too much of him being like beat up? Maybe, but I think it still worked for the movie.
There's an interesting article that I read where Corin Sweat, the actor who plays Superman, is talking with James Gunn. And so James Gunn, I guess, went to Zack Snyder when they were designing the costume. And he was like, well, how do I incorporate these trunks in there? Which is, for any comic book fans, and when you're translating comic book stuff to movies, there's always that consideration. It's like, well, what's their costume going to look like? Is it going to look kind of cheesy on screen? And Zack Snyder said, I tried to do the Superman trunks, but it just wasn't working, so they didn't. But Corin Sweat had an interesting quote where he said, you know what? Superman needs to look approachable to the common man, right? Like he looks like a professional wrestler, and it kind of does. Right? Like the suit works, but the trunks are always like, are they necessary? Like, why are you wearing trunks over tights, kind of thing? But he says, it's designed that way so that the common man can kind of feel like this is not this godlike figure, which he definitely feels like in Man of Steel. This is just someone who's one of us. He's a little bit more powerful. He can help us. But he's friendly. He's a savior. He's got that feel to him. And so Gunn eventually said, okay, yeah, you're right. Like, let's include the trunks. It'll be a key part of his uniform. And I think it does play into this fact that, like you said, it makes for an approachable, likable, much more human feeling Superman in this movie. So I don't know if there's anything else physical that I wanted to unpack more. I think let's talk about mental, and then we can talk about kind of the film as a whole and some other elements that may not tie specifically to the four cores. When we talk about the mental core, I think the first person that comes to mind is Lex, right? And typically in the comic books, this character is one of the most, intelligent, savvy, rich characters out there. And I thought this Lex did a really good job of being not a human and approachable, but also showing like the level of his intelligence. And
Yeah, for sure.
He's a little over the top, but I think it works, and I think he's written that way for a reason to, again, bring some levity and comic relief and humor to the character. But he also does a really good job of just, showing the extent of kind of human intelligence in comparison to this alien from another planet. And it's like, who is this guy? Like, he can't compete with me.
Yeah. So you mentioned how he's over the top, and I think it just is very much a James Gunn type villain. And I'm thinking about James Gunn villains. all of them are just evil people. Ronan is an evil person. Ego you like at the beginning, and you just find out, well, dang, you're putting tumors into people's heads around the universe and killing Star-Lord's mom. And then High Evolutionary from
I forgot
Guardians
about him.
3, like, he's just an evil guy. And now Lex, even though he's way more human than his other villains, this is another evil person. Like, Lex Luthor just wants to be a powerful king type guy. His motive is just, I don't like Superman. He gets too much credit. So he's like a top tier hater, and every time he gets a glimpse at him, just has like this rage inside of him. And when you look at the last few comic book movies we've gotten, I don't think we've gotten an evil villain. The Void wasn't necessarily evil in Thunderbolts. General Ross wasn't really evil in Brave New World, and even the leader in Brave New World, I mean, you kind of felt bad for him.
Whereas Lex was just a jerk,
yeah,
just for the sake of
he was just a mean guy. I mean, there's a scene even with his own people. He throws a pencil at his girlfriend, and he's like, "Get out of here, you idiot! Like, we don't need you here." And he knocks over cups on his table, says, "Pick it up, clean it up." So, he's just like an evil guy, and Over the Top, I think, works perfectly for James Gunn's, because that's exactly who his villains were before. Like, High Evolutionary, evil guy. He's very, very like aggressive, freaks out over every little thing if it's not perfect. The Ronin too, right? Like him yelling at Thanos, "You call me boy," all this stuff. So it just worked perfect. And Lex, Superman was probably my favorite character in the movie. Lex was probably my second favorite character, and he was just awesome.
He was. He did a really good job, and you know there's a lot of things that he does, and again, you kind of. And this will be a good segue into kind of the larger other parts of the movie, but you have to suspend some disbelief in terms of he's creating like these pocket universes, and they're causing black holes, and he's also negotiating to take over this country. That's the other. There's a couple plots happening which we can talk about.
Yeah,
but you can just see he's got his hands in a whole bunch of different stuff, and you're like, who is this guy? Like, you've got to be a genius. But Nicholas Hoult did a great job of portraying this kind of megalomaniac jerk who was not going to be defeated because of his intellect and his ambition. Right. And he also, I think it was really interesting, the choice in terms of kind of his past relationships, right? So he basically, he has one girlfriend who's kind of central to the plot being to the plot moving forward. But you find in one of those other pocket universes, he's like throwing another girlfriend in jail kind of thing, right? So he very much, he's a user of people. Yeah. But it's played off in a way that it's humorous,
Yeah, for sure.
Your mom also felt bad for Lex at some point in the movie, despite all the things that he does. Like we talked about, only one person dying in the movie. Lex is the one who murders this person, basically. But you still find a way to have some emotional connection.
Right.
With it.
I actually wanted to ask you about that, because I was going to bring that up. Why do you think that is? Like, what is it about Lex Luthor that, despite everything that he was doing, you are still like, I'm sorry, bro. Like, that does suck a little bit that, you got exposed to the world as like this really evil mastermind guy, and that you're not really as for the people as you make yourself seem to be.
That's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do actually with the strength of the actor playing the role. So we saw, was it Eisenberg who played Lex?
Yeah, it was Jesse Eisenberg.
Was he in Man of Steel, or was he in...
that's actually a good question.
Batman
he was in Batman vs Superman for sure, because he was the whole like Martha connection between the two. I don't know. General Zod was Man of Steel. I don't know if Lex ever appeared in it.
Lex was actually in it. So if I could just compare those two, which are the two most recent ones, this one just hands down kind of captures the essence of the character, and he has enough screen time where you start to build a relationship with him, and there is some empathy with who he is as a human being, not necessarily what he's doing, but just you see him and hear him enough where you start to kind of relate a bit more with him. So I think a lot of it has to do with the actor and how the character is written. because he is, like you said, like he's a jerk, and he does probably the most heinous things in the movie. You know,
like you said, he did a great job. And when you look at the two, Holt and Eisenberg, I think that Eisenberg was a little bit more like ticky and on edge, and you know, he didn't display his intelligence as much as this one. He didn't
feel like someone to be respected.
No, exactly. Whereas this one, he's like very confident in who he is. A lot of money. Everyone works for him. He's
got an
super
audience
smart.
with like the Secretary of Defense or whatever.
Right, yeah, he's like sitting in the room with like Rick Flag and all these
Yeah.
other government officials. He just has like a status, and he carries himself up high.
Yeah.
And like from a mental standpoint, he is unstable, but also not unstable. Like he's unstable in terms of, you know, he hates Superman so much he's going to make rash decisions, and he starts to do that a lot more later on in the movie with letting this pocket universe tear apart Metropolis, which could lead to the end of the world.
Right.
And he just doesn't care.
He doesn't care, yeah.
But I think that he's also stable enough where he has a plan. And
that's a key thing. He had a plan for everything. Yeah.
I really liked how it was Lex that was technically fighting Superman through the clone.
That was very
That
cool.
was awesome.
Yeah.
Because how does Lex face up against Superman? Superman is so powerful, and Lex is still like a fragile man, that it's hard to get them to face off as Lex being the true villain. But him being able to control the clone was brilliant by James Gunn,
I agree.
I thought.
And I had forgotten about that as a plot point, but I think that is a really great demonstration of kind of the intelligence and how they demonstrate Lex's intellect. Like brain always beats brawn.
Yeah.
Right. And kind of thinking back to it now, that's a key line in one of the battles. But he really demonstrates it because it's like, I can't physically take you on, but I know a counter to all of your moves because I've studied them all.
Yeah.
And I've created this clone from your DNA. And so you find out that he's been kind of laying the groundwork for this defeat for a very long time because of the meticulous and intelligence approach that he's taken to finding out as much as he can about this nemesis of his.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that it was just brilliant. And like you said, the brain always beats brawn. And, you know, he had, I don't know how many combinations of fight patterns he'd have to have. He's like 28D, 2F, 3A. It's crazy, but it's cool. And I like how Superman then uses the brain always beats brawn, as in, once I get rid of your brain, it's me versus the clone at that point. Right. And so it was just cool and cool way to show Lex as like the main villain.
Yeah.
So
it was. I think overall, what are some of your impressions about the movie? What are some of your takeaways? What are some of your thoughts in terms of next phases for the DCE?
So overall I liked it. You know, I've seen scores here and there. Ultimately, I'd probably give it like around like a 8.5 to a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed it, and I think that outside of Batman movies, this is my favorite DC movie now. I think that the story was great, and I think that James Gunn did a really good job of showing Superman as just a beacon of hope and who Superman is supposed to be. I think it feels a lot more real than Man of Steel in terms of like, you know, Superman is just a really great guy. He is Superman. And there's a lot of scenes in the movie where I think they demonstrated those little snippets of people seeing him as a beacon of hope, whether it was the kid with the flag and the whole country starts chanting Superman, which genuinely gave me chills in the theater. It was one of those only moments in the movie where I was like, whoa, like Superman actually is this beacon of hope to people. And another one that I really liked is when this building is about to fall onto this girl's car as she's driving away. And right as it's about to crash, you see Superman holding it up. And she starts driving away and she turns around and you can see she starts tearing up. And I was like, yeah, like, it's just a feel-good, he's just a feel-good superhero.
Very much a feel-good movie.
So a couple plot points I want to talk about in terms of the story that, you know, one, I think they actually did well that I didn't think was going to go well. And the other one, I don't think it was bad. I just think that it was taking me out a little bit. I'll start with the one that I think did well that I wasn't sure of, and that's the Justice Gang. Now, I'm hoping that this isn't the Justice League, to be honest. And I know that they're kind of teasing that with the Justice Gang. But I actually think that he did a good job with them. And I didn't want them to be the ones to go save the country from the war. I did want it to be Superman, especially with what I was saying about getting chills from that flag scene. But I do think it was cool, and I thought it was a good scene, and seeing the three of them come and save these people, and I think that James
Building
Gunn,
the Hall of Justice, you
yeah,
see in there.
the Hall of Justice. I think that James Gunn's decision to have them in this movie works better for the future of the
Right.
DC universe, because now you're not just going to have all these random heroes pop up out of nowhere
Right.
after Superman's been there. Like, no, metahumans have been here for a while, and we know about the Green Lantern Corps, and I'm sure we'll get more on Hot Girl and where she came from. But I think that was a good decision. I think he did it well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about all the Pocket Universe stuff.
Right.
I think it was a great display of intelligence, and I think that's why it's needed, and I will appreciate that. But it's just like the scenes in there were all right to me. I liked the prison and the kryptonite, but other than that, I think having the Pocket Universe ripping Metropolis part happen at the exact same time as the war.
Right.
I would have liked to see Superman deal with both of them.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was a bad decision. Like, I still love the movie. Clearly, I'm giving it like a 9 out of 10. Like, I thought it was great. It's just I would have liked to see Superman be the one to kind of do all of that.
Yeah.
And then on that point, I think I would have liked to see Superman display his like strength a little bit more
Right,
in
right.
terms of fighting people. The scene with him and the Raptors was cool, and like lasering them and
That-
punching
that
them
scene
and throwing
was
them
cool,
all around.
yeah.
But even with like the kaiju, like I feel like he should be able to defeat him a little bit easier than that. So, but all in all, yeah, I liked it a lot.
And that scene with the kaiju is another example of James Gunn's take on this Superman, which I think is fresh, and I think it just needs to be juggled and balanced, because so he's fighting this monster and he's like, well, I was hoping we could take it to like some intergalactic zoo or whatever.
Right, yeah, right, yeah. He's like, no, we should be taking care of it. Like,
yeah, exactly. So, he's very much this kind-hearted, and, Gunn went deep in that. So I think that really worked for this film. And if he's setting up the rest of the DC universe, which I'm not sure about, because, you mentioned this, a Clayface movie, which is going to be like a
Right.
horror movie kind of thing, right? And then we've got the Batman in its own, it's a film noir kind of genre, which is very cool, and we loved, but very different from this film. So I think one of my questions is, because this is part of a larger universe, what is the strategy for bringing this type of film, which works really well for this specific character, into the rest of the universe? And so
Yeah.
the Justice League and Justice Gang, and my thought was they were kind of setting the stage, but it gave them a lot of room to kind of get rid of characters that they don't maybe think will work.
I
and bring in
totally
new
agree.
characters.
Yeah.
I also think that might have been part of the Pocket Universe ploy as well, like, because you might have these Pocket Universes across the globe.
True, yeah.
Where they can now bring in other powerful characters
Right.
that have somehow landed on Earth and that we don't
Right.
know how they're there.
That's true. I didn't even think about that.
He did an interesting thing, like right at the beginning of the movie, because this isn't a Superman origin film, which most of them are.
Mm-hmm.
But within like 5 minutes, he explains,
Yeah.
this is where he came from. This is
like-
why he's here. There's other metahumans that are
Yeah.
here, which I thought was a great way to reboot the universe and not have to go into a bunch of backstory and create a bunch of standalone films. But this film, again, because we talked about the other films that we've seen through the first half of this year, I'd rank it up there. I'd definitely rank it in the top 5.
Oh, yeah,
probably
for sure.
Maybe even in the top 3. There's been some really good movies that
Yeah.
have come out this year already, though. So I think my biggest takeaways for it are Gunn as a director kind of over-delivered on this one. I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I think his take on the character and his, how he approaches filmmaking really works for Superman. I got a lot of question marks about how it's going to play into everything else,
Yeah.
but being more than pleasantly surprised with how this movie came out, I've got good expectations and high
Yeah,
expectations
for
for
sure.
the rest of the universe.
You mentioned that he left a lot of room to kind of pull in and take out characters if needed. And honestly, I think that maybe because we've seen the MCU unfold the way that it did,
Right.
I think it's a lot more obvious, at least for me, and I could be wrong, that I think even James Gunn is a little unsure about
Right.
where he wants to take it.
Yeah.
Because to me, there isn't anything in this movie that is is telling me like, okay, something is developing
Right.
or this is
It's
next.
very much a standalone.
Yeah.
movie.
And we know, so Supergirl shows up in the
Yeah.
end. And we know Supergirl's, I think, comes out next year, along with Clayface, if they both come out next year. But yeah, with the Justice Gang and, you know, the end credits aren't anything crazy special. I think James Gunn needs to feel it out a little bit, and I think that's perfectly fine. I think that just like, you know, after seeing the MCU, we have these expectations that it's like, okay, when's Justice League? When's Darkseid? When's Batman? When's Flash? But no, like back then with the MCU, like in phases 1 and phase 2, it was a process.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that I have question marks too. And it'll be interesting to see where he takes it. But I think something beautiful could be unfolding with
Totally.
James Gunn's direction, because yeah, this top 4, top 3 movie of the year for me.
It was a breath of fresh air, and I'm not one of those people that, you know, is like the MCU is falling off and this and that. I mean, I think Thunderbolts was, despite its box office success or lack thereof, I thought Thunderbolts was a great movie. I still personally put it above Superman for a couple different reasons. I mean, more invested in those characters, and I just thought the plot, and you know, we go check out a review of Thunderbolts
Yeah,
if
true.
you haven't seen it already. And you'll see the comparison that we make in terms of the story
Yeah.
building for this. This is a great summer blockbuster. Like, you can bring your kids to it, you can bring your family to it, you can bring your older grandparents that grew up with the Superman comics, and I think they will love this take on the character by
Yeah.
comparison to, say, Man of Steel, where
For
they'd
sure.
be like, this isn't my Superman. This is everybody's Superman. So go out and watch this film. Come back, leave some comments below. We'd love to hear more of your feedback about, you know, our take on it. Tell us your take and what you think might be coming next in the DCU. And we'll see you back here for our next breakdown.